Hello, I'm Christian, and welcome to the Jenior Leadership Podcast, a show where we talk about effective collaboration, influence, and leadership in an increasingly complex world. My interview partner is Dr. Dirk Schlimm. Dirk is an international leadership expert and the author of Influencing Powerful People. The purpose of this podcast is to share ideas and stimulate discussion, and it does not constitute professional advice of any kind. If such advice is needed, the services of a competent professional should be sought. The speakers, host, and Jenior International Incorporated are not to be held responsible for any use, misuse, or reuse of the content. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the Jenior Leadership Podcast. Today, we're talking about the flat organization structure. This topic has made its way back into the headlines as economic headwinds are making and taking many organizations back to emphasizing strategic focus, operational efficiency, and organizational simplicity. A flat organization, so the expectation is, cuts down on hierarchy, speeds up decision-making, and saves costs. Dirk, what do we make of that? Is this the time of the flat organization?
Yes, Christian. Talking about the flat organization has become more fashionable again, and we see this in many corporate announcements, in fact. And by and large, it sounds like a very good idea. Of course, I mean, who would seriously say that they want more hierarchy, more bureaucracy, or more complexity? But like so often with management concepts, the ideas are not new, and so the idea of a flat organization also is not new. It has been around for some time, and it has appeared in different variation, and so it's running from somewhat flat to radically flat, and everything in between. And if our listeners remember our friend Bartleby from the Economist magazine, Bartleby actually has a very nice column in which he talks about organizations that he calls flat as a pancake, and why they exist and what can go wrong with them.
Flat as a pancake. I like that. But let's get into it. What does organizational flatness actually look like in real life?
Yeah, Christian, that's a good question, because the term actually means different things to different people.
Right. So Dirk, let's dive in. What are these different things it can mean?
Yeah, I think when most people talk about flattening the organization today, they are talking about taking out management layers. So they're looking at how many management levels there are between, say, a frontline employee and the CEO. So the frontline employee may report to a team leader, who then reports to a manager, who then reports to a vice president. So that would be three layers between the frontline person and the CEO, which really doesn't sound too bad. But then you could have in organizations senior managers and directors who are between the manager and the vice president, and maybe the assistant vice presidents, or vice presidents, senior vice presidents, executives, vice presidents, and probably more like group presidents. And all of those positions and layers are on your way to the CEO. And then, of course, there is the proliferation of the CXO. That's a term people sometimes use now. That's everything from the chief financial officer, the chief revenue officer, the chief customer officer, the chief people officer, procurement, sustainability officer, and so a whole assortment of chief something officers that you now find in organizations.
Wow. So that sounds like a lot of layers. And as I'm imagining it, it sounds like a whole stack of pancakes going up and up and up. So rather than one nice flat pancake, we got a stack here. Is that what we're dealing with?
Exactly. But this is only one sense of the meaning of flattening an organization. And we'll come back to that. But in its true, or at least most radical sense, the pioneers of the flat organization, they wanted something else. They really want to take out the boss. They want to take the boss out of the organization altogether, not just have fewer of them.
Wow, no bosses. That sounds very interesting. Do these organizations without bosses actually exist, Dirk?
Yeah, there may not be organization without bosses altogether, but there are certainly organizations that have the term flat organization to mean that companies operate by and large without internal hierarchy, and so without any bosses or managers. And so these are companies like W.L. Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex, you may know that name, or Zappos Shoes, which is an online shoe retailer. And at some point, and maybe most famously, a company called Semco Partners, and that's a Brazilian company led by Ricardo Semler.
Okay, Dirk. Ricardo Semler, you said most famously. I'll have to admit, I don't know who that is, so maybe you could fill us in.
Yeah, so Ricardo Semler took over the ailing family business from his father, and he credits the transformation into a bossless organization into getting the company going again. And Semler wrote a book called The Maverick, and he became the champion on what he calls a radical employee friendly philosophy, and he has a few TED talks out, so you can check these out. And so in this sense, in similar sense, the flat organization is really about a philosophical and an alternative approach to management, not just a bit more efficiency. And just as an aside, so Semler's book was required reading in an organization that I worked in at that time, and that organization was quite hierarchical, but the CEO at the time loved the idea, and it really shows that there is a lot of appeal here. And Semler is a very gifted communicator, and so he's a good champion of his maverick ideas.
Wow, Dirk, I love maverick ideas. I love things described as radical philosophy, but that leads us to the question, and it sounds like you've read the book. So, does this actually work?
Yeah. So, well, Ricardo Semler says it worked for him, and it worked at Semco, and he said, in fact, again, he said it saved the family company, and is very passionate about this. And I do agree that these ideas are, at least at some level, quite useful, and they found their way into the mainstream. So things like a culture where instructions from the boss can be challenged. So people who work for the boss said, "Hey, why are we doing this?" Or where the top managers involve people in the strategy process rather than thinking they're the ones with the big picture. So they see the value of including the perspectives from people who are close to the customer, so people who execute the strategy that they're dreaming up, so to speak. And then also it can be a good idea that before we embark on a big change initiative, we consult with the people who will be affected, so that possibly we can adjust or make the change initiative work better, because this helps us think through, and we can understand the inevitable drawbacks ahead of time, or we can mitigate unintended consequences. So there are a lot of ways where you can see Semler's ideas at work.
All right, Dirk, thanks for that. That sounds pretty good to me. So, we're talking about inclusive management here and getting people involved. But that still, just hearing how you described it, sounds to be a bit of a far cry from bossless management. So, my question is, can bossless management actually work?
Yeah, I realize, Christian, you're pinning me down here, and it appears, at least, that companies like Semco, Gore, and Zappos, it actually has worked for them, or it has worked for them at a time. And I know that quite a few companies have tried to emulate the practices of these companies. For example, Zappos actually offered seminars to managers from other companies or other industries how to not have managers anymore. And just this morning, I read in the Wall Street Journal that there actually is a lawsuit over Zappos founder Tony Hsieh's workplace happiness brand, which is called Delivering Happiness. And actually, Hsieh himself, the founder of Zappos, passed away tragically in an accident. But this new lawsuit just shows how his brand has endured and how appealing his ideas remain. But then also things can change, and so Hsieh's companies, Zappos, has been acquired by Amazon, and from what I read, they have pulled back a bit from the founders' workplace ideas. But this may not even be so much the point. And so my view would be that a system or a philosophy like this is always as good and only as good as the people who are running it and how well it allows them or helps the company respond well to the demands of the market. And I think we really must remember that the market is a very powerful force, and as a business, you really cannot go against the market. And so I think much will depends on the stage of the company, the people involved, their goals. Do I want a small business? Do I want a big business? The industry, market conditions, and so on. But ultimately, it does show the tremendous appeal of this idea, elusive or real, the idea of a successful business that is made up of people who enjoy their work at their company.
Right, Dirk. That does sound like a really interesting idea. But here at the Jenior Leadership Podcast, we're about getting practical. And part of that is bringing in your experience, Dirk. So let me ask you this. Have you encountered these ideas that sound good on paper in action? Can you give us an example from your experience if you've seen this or how it might have played out?
Yeah, Christian, and sure. And so for example, I have worked with a team that was a small, collegial, no egos kind of team, very committed to the success of the team and the company, was very much in startup mode. And so in that team, we had a very good way of working constructively through our differences. And so that was actually much more like working with a group of friends, people who respected each other, was a very rewarding way to work and also to achieve performance. And again, if everyone is a team player, if everybody's motivated to win, everybody's putting the team first and so on, it works really, really well. But I've also worked with a team in an organization that had very strong bossless tendencies, but it didn't work out nearly as well because there were people there who liked the bossless part of it, but they were not willing to put the organization first. They were not at all good at managing conflict. And so they actually needed a boss and they didn't want one. And so I would say that a bossless organization is a recipe for disaster if people do not get along and are not willing to take one for the team, as the saying goes. And so working well in a bossless organization and delivering results is actually a lot harder than one may think. You need great subject matter skills, you need great people skills, you need a high level of commitment to the team and a high level of commitment to the organization and its purpose, and you need that throughout the organization. So in the end, I would think it is very important that there is someone who is in charge, someone who can end the debate and make a decision. And I actually believe that managers do have a very important role, and we really should not underestimate what a good boss can accomplish for the company and for their people.
Thanks, Dirk. That's very helpful. Grateful that you brought in your experience there. And that really shows that there's a lot of factors and nuance at play here. So now that we discussed the flat organization in the sense of the bossless organization, what about the flat organization as in the more efficient or streamlined organization? Can you tell us a bit more about that here?
Yeah, and Christian, I think that's a kind of flat organization that is much more commonly talked about today when the idea come up. So here's a company that does not want to do away with hierarchy altogether. You still have a top down, you still have managers in charge, and you still have layers of management, but you just have fewer of them. So you have fewer layers, fewer bosses. And as a result of that, you will have more people reporting into a particular boss, and that's something that's known as increasing the span of control in a company. And advocates of this type of delayering will also emphasize that fewer bosses will lead to more empowerment because there are no longer enough managers to control every last little detail, and that's a good thing. And at least that's the theory and the idea behind it.
So, Dirk, that's helpful. But what do you mean by that's the theory?
Well, Christian, the bosses organizations we discussed earlier is often driven by a strong philosophical motivation of giving the power to the employees, creating a corporate democracy of sorts, and so on. But again, when it comes to flattening the organization in a more traditional sense, the primary motivation will often be that it's just more cost efficient to work with fewer layers, that you eliminate bureaucracy and so on. But then the culture of the organization can still be quite top down, can still be quite hierarchical, and many companies do have the intent of being more participatory or more inclusive, but then in practice it's not always the case. There are flatter organizations, if we call them that, with a strong sense of command and control.
I see. Dirk, that makes a lot of sense. So the flatter the organization is, the more efficient it should be. There are fewer layers separating the top from the bottom, and people have more responsibility. So my question is, what is not to like about this? Why doesn't everyone flatten their organization?
Yeah, Christian. Well, first of all, many companies are saying that they are flattening, and it is for all the reasons I discussed. But then again, who would say that they like hierarchy, that they like bureaucracy, and that they like an overbearing boss? But then, of course, there is the context of the industry, the geographical culture, and so on. And then we find that one size rarely fits all.
I see what you're saying there, Dirk, but let's dig in a bit. Besides the context, is there another but here?
Yeah, I think there is.
Okay, fill us in.
Yeah. So I think that some of this flattening push can be driven by not really understanding the value of good management, including and especially good middle management. Some people have this idea that of a mid-level boss as micromanaging, calling too many meetings, spending too much time trying to look good in front of their bosses, stifling their employees, and so on. And I'm sure some of them are, but others do add real value.
Right, Dirk, you're tapping into the perception there, but how do they add some real value? Maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of valuable things that good managers do, and they're sometimes overlooked because we're so focused on bad management. And if I can go on a bit of a tangent here, some people think that managers are altogether bad, and they want to talk about leaders. They say, managers bad, leaders good. And in my mind, there's a little bit of nonsense going on here, actually.
All right, Dirk, we got a hot take incoming. So in what way is there some nonsense here?
Yeah. I think in a sense that there is because there are bad managers, and we don't want them. But again, they're also good managers, and they do add a lot of values. Good managers translate the big vision into direction for their department. They show you how the job is done. They answer your questions. They help you perform better by coaching or by demanding more performance. They know you can do more, and they energize you. They cheer you up when you're having a bad day, and they help you. They ask the big bosses in HR to give you a raise. They think about your next career move. They help sort of conflicts with other departments in a constructive manner, so that organizational conflict does not fester or even paralyze us. And so the list goes on and on and on. And all of this is good management. And some of this gets lost when we're on a quest to flatten the organization without really understanding what it takes to get things accomplished with the kind of people you have in your company today. Because as a C-level person, you can be quite far away from the day-to-day reality and what it really takes to get things done.
Again, Dirk, you're making a lot of sense here, but let me just ask, are you suggesting that we should stick with a steep hierarchy after all?
No, Krishna, I don't think that's it. And the first thing, rather, again, is to know the difference between good managers and bad managers. So maybe instead of flattening the organization to solve a problem, you should give more responsibility to good managers and replace bad managers. So maybe that's a start, and so you get better managers and you keep the good ones. The second one is, yes, that over time, I agree, organizations will develop inefficiencies. Hierarchy does creep in further and further. Management positions are maybe created for the wrong reasons, like someone wants a bigger title and you don't want to lose them. And at that time, it may have, at the time that may have been a good decision, but there comes a time where you have to take stock and simplify. So absolutely, we should from time to time review how we're organized. We should see where we're inefficient. We should see where the realities of our market, our customers, of our business demand something else, and that something else will indeed often be fewer layers.
All right, Dirk, it sounds like you're driving home to a conclusion here. So what exactly are you telling us?
Well, what I'm telling you, Christian, or what I'm advocating here for with all our listeners is that by all means, have a look at where and how you can delayer, flatten, streamline, or whatever else you call it to make your organization more efficient, and don't have more people and managers than you really need. I'm all for that, and I'm sure you will find opportunities to do so. But then also, please have a look at your culture and realize how that a more collaborative culture will make it easier to flatten the organization. So you have to ask yourself whether you have the people who are good collaborators, whether you're ready to flatten, so to speak. And then please don't forget about the benefits of good management, and do not leave people at their own devices in the name of organizational flatness. Rather insist on good management and see how and where it adds value. Because if you flatten too much with people who are not ready for it, you will see that informal power structures will creep in instead. And now you have the people with the loudest voice, the biggest ego, the highest salary, the savviest politics, or whatever it is, take over and fill that management vacuum. And now you have created a new problem for yourself, and that is actually very nicely described in the Bartleby column that I mentioned earlier. There is always, things are never as easy as they look on the surface.
Dirk, very clear, very helpful, and that sounds great to me. But as I said, we were driving home to a conclusion here. So Dirk, thank you very much. Let me just take a moment to summarize what we've been talking about today. So in this conversation, we discussed the virtues and drawbacks of flattening organizations. This in turn led to a discussion of layers of management, spans of control, and collaborative versus hierarchical structures, and even organizational happiness, if such a thing even exists. The first lesson I think we learned is that a flattened hierarchy or even a bossless organization may very well increase engagement and even performance, but that isn't the full story. Depending on your people, industry, and broader cultures, different structures will offer unique advantages or disadvantages. There is no one size fits all or a surefire way to approach company structure. And even within different organizational categories, there could be lots of variety and degrees of empowerment or control. This in turn led us to a second discussion, and we learned that when it comes to reflecting on structure and organizational layers, we should not just look at the organizational chart, but also recognize that the incredible difference that good management can make. While flattening an organization may make a lot of sense in the face of it, this is not the whole story again. Insisting on good management and replacing bad managers with good managers, and then in turn giving those good managers more responsibility, may also create a lot of value, which could be lost when we're engaged in too much flattening. While we, of course, never want to overdo it, a layered hierarchy as such isn't always a bad thing. In fact, sometimes it could be exactly what you need, assuming you have the right people and especially the right managers in the right positions. Dirk, how does that sound? Anything you want to add here?
Well, I think, Christian, you summarized it very well. Thanks a lot for that.
No, Dirk, thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing your experience. We always appreciate that. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in again to the Jenior Leadership Podcast. We love sharing these conversations with you. And I'll just briefly mention that we referenced a number of articles and different conversations. So I encourage you, if you're interested, in the show notes down below, we'll have links to several of those. Please continue the reading and continue the conversation. If you have any questions or feedback or suggestions, let us know. Send us an email. We'd love to include you in this conversation. But as always, we hope you enjoyed, and we look forward to being with you next time in a couple of weeks on the Jenior Leadership Podcast. Until then, take care.